Cannabis on Depression and Anxiety. A presentation by Avery Luna. How was that? 10 out of 10? Bonus points? I'm kidding. Okay. My experiment was inspired by my personal experience with cannabis. I know that reveals huge researcher bias, but it's maybe important. Cannabis altered my thoughts on a lot of things about myself, like my own anxieties. Like, it started totally recreationally. I didn't have any condition to cure. I mean, when I got my med card, I kind of just told them that my back hurt. I said, I'm tall, my joints, and they're like, here you go, bud. But anyways, the more I used it, the more I got familiar with its effects, I realized it made me more aware of my own thoughts, like I was thinking. You know, it's kind of a trippy experience to like watch yourself think, but very fun too. Anyways, as I was more aware of my own thoughts, I started to get better at changing them a little bit. You know, I'd go on walks, I just kind of follow whatever train of thought came to mind. Think about a lot of different things, but they were mostly centered around self-improvement. They got pretty motivational, you know, like the reason I'm alive, what the things I do say about who I am. You know, I had started to think about things that I hadn't really thought about in a while, like how do I become more social and not terrible, you know, self-loathing worthy. Not in a bad way. Anyways, continue with the presentation. That just gives a little context to the pictures here. I know that what I did and what I went through is totally possible without it. But it is a massive coincidence that I started using more regularly, having experiences like I described where it would change how I think and thoughts would become more interesting and the things of that nature. I'll go into further detail on that later. But holy crap, lost my train of thought. But yeah, it kind of inspired. I can't help but associate it. So, and I'm thinking that because obviously when I went from the picture on the left, which I think you can see my cursor. Yeah, no, you can. I went from that dude to this dude. To this dude. I know you're laughing, but it's this dude. And part of, like, obviously it made me happier in all the ways that I was changing myself, and I found that I didn't have anxiety really anymore, or very little of it, and I was happy quite frequently. And again, I know that sober people that don't smoke can do exactly this, but because of the way things happened, I think that pot had something to do with allowing me to change the regular way that I think and slip into a new way. I will explain that. I promise it will make sense, my beautiful babies. I mean, I kind of am addressing the whole class, like I assume I'm going to send this out, but if it's just Dr. Johnson, I take that back. Cannabis has been around for a very long time. They actually found it in trace amounts inside of mummies. So yeah, it dates back to Egypt. In ancient Greece, it was given to the oracles so they may speak with the gods, dude. Under federal law, it's a Schedule I substance. So basically heroin. Has, you know, I'm not going to read all that. What's interesting about it is that we discovered a part of the body because of pot. In trying to understand how pot works, they isolated one part of it, and when they found that part, they were like, what does this part bond to? So they had to discover, and they discovered that it bonded to something that they didn't know what it was. And they found out it was a cannabinoid receptor, which They didn't know what that was either. So they discovered an entire body system because they were studying pot. So, and that was not that long ago. It wasn't until 1960 that that we did this research. So what we found was the endocannabinoid system. And I'm going to go into further detail on the next page, but this system is huge. It's it's in every major organ system in your brain or in your body, including your brain. It's everywhere. And we didn't even know about it because, you know, well, I guess we didn't really have the technology to know about it. But in the critical period to develop technology of the 1920s to the 1960s, you know, like where we could actually look at the thing, you know, properly. Of course, it was banned during all that time, so we are a little bit behind on the proper amount of research. But the more we research it, the more complicated it's getting. It's getting pretty cool. And I'm not going to lie, I don't have a lot of offhand knowledge about the three things I listed there. Terpenes, cannabinoids, that. But fortunately, it's not that important. Basically, cannabis, you'd think that the plant is just the one plant. There's probably a couple chemicals in there, right? There are actually 525 different chemicals that make up pot, or at least that have been identified. You know, there are, well, of course, there are mainly a couple of them, so really it boils down to like a major 4 or 5, the first one being THC, which is the psychoactive one. But there are a lot of different components to cannabis, and they all have an effect on the high itself. So you'll have different amounts of cannabinoids. THC is just one cannabinoid. There are a lot of different kinds, and depending on what amount of those kinds you have, you'll get a whole different effect. So the more we study it, the more we'll be able to do with it. The more medically, I mean, if you know, it's determined that there are anxiety and mood improving effects of it, I'm sure we could find one of the terpene profiles or cannabinoid profiles that, you know, does that most effectively, or does. You kind of understand what I'm saying, I would hope, you smart people. So, like I said in the previous slide, where I didn't do a smooth transition this time, the endocannabinoid system is pretty big. It is pretty much in every major organ system. Like I already said that line. That's redundant. But because it's so ubiquitous, it's a fancy word, it has a role in all of these thingies. And I mean, I'm sure in the time that I've been talking, you've kind of been subconsciously reading them. So I'm just going to let you finish doing that. Spare myself the... Yep, just keep going. So obviously there are a couple of critical ones here. You know, being anxiety, that's kind of what the whole thing's on. But a lot of the other ones are kind of interesting too. Basically, you know what? No, I don't think that's totally important. But yeah, it maintains a balance by controlling the signaling in all of these. And I'll explain a lot more of that on the next slide. But basically, it works by cannabinoid receptors that are like everywhere in the body. And I'm going to go right into this slide. There are 2 different cannabinoid receptors. There's one that's in your brain, mostly. It's the first one, cannabinoid receptor type 1. And then there's one that's in the rest of your body, but we're not going to talk about him. He's a loser. We just care about the first one because that's mostly what causes the psychological effects. So basically, to give a little insight into how these bad boys work, basically, where to start? When we're talking about nerve cells, endocannabinoids, or, you know, okay, I got it. Okay, sorry, I'm not gonna restart this recording. I got it. When this receptor is not bound to, basically when there's nothing attached to it, it will block nervous transmission. And so when the body wants to signal, it will send an endocannabinoid to bind there and allow the transmission to pass, allow the signal to get through. And this is everywhere in the body. So basically, when it says it regulates it, it means that it controls the nervous activity that controls that activity. It's kind of strange. Because nerves are, it's not so simple as this, but nerves are an on-off sort of thing with the synapses, right? Either you're firing or you're resting, either you're active or you're resting. The cannabinoid receptors control the in-between state. They control the transition between the two. And so the brain relies on there being a steady flow of endocannabinoids in the system that it produces itself. But when you load it up with a bunch of exogenous cannabinoids, which basically means pot, anytime you smoke it or eat it, you're getting outside. Exogenous means outside. I'm sure you all know that. I'm talking to smart people. When you take the exogenous cannabinoids into your body, it will jack that transmission rate up. So you know how when it's off, no signal gets through? Well, it is constantly on, so it is just a party in your nerve cells. So if you imagine, I'll just go like this. It stimulates the cannabinoid receptors. So smoking cannabis stimulates the cannabinoid receptors. What that does is it reduces the nerve refractory period. And so basically every time a nerve cell fires, it needs to reset before it can fire again. But when you smoke, it really don't need to do that. It just goes and goes and goes. So that has some pretty interesting effects on the body and a very interesting distortion on the senses and perception and a lot of different more complicated functions in the brain. It has some very interesting effects on anxiety, where it has been shown to, at least in mice, when the cannabinoid receptor is stimulated in what's called the amygdala, which is what controls fear in beings with an amygdala. When it's stimulated there, it helps the extinction, it increases the extinction of fear memories. Meaning, when the mouse is about to do something and it kind of stops because it remembers that it might get hurt doing that thing. When this receptor is stimulated, it does not respond quite like that. And I'm gonna actually reference to my research a little bit preemptively because it was very curious. There was I'd already done obviously the literature review before I interviewed him, so when he told me, it reminded me immediately of this. But he said that when he was at I think he said it was a Tenacious D concert, that's when I knew I liked him, he was able to be in the middle of the crowd because he was on an edible, when normally he doesn't like that, and he doesn't like it, because he's afraid he won't be able to get out, or he's afraid that someone's going to push into him, or stuff like that. He would get angry at him. I just thought that was an interesting coinky dink. So, current cannabis research has a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of they make good use of models, like behavioral models and things that have been well tested, and they also have very large sample sizes, so that goes very well for them. But what they lack, however, is a very highly specific question. The data that they get is the result of a participant putting a number to a scale. And because of this, my research will consist entirely of qualitative data and a very small sample size. I conducted 5 interviews that lasted about 3 hours each, and I talked to them pretty much in depth what happens to their mind when they use cannabis. I kind of mirrored it off of my own experience. I asked them what they thought about, how it might affect the normal reactions they have. The exact questions that I asked were different for all of the interviews, but the they all were trying to answer the same thing. I didn't. I tried my best to just ask for their experience and not, say, I did this. How is this for you? Which, I mean, I didn't do any of that, so I think mission accomplished. Data analysis for me was basically, it was basically just looking at all of the interviews I had and trying to get themes between what they said, because there were some of the same words, but sometimes I had to, kind of interpret what they said and ask if this is what you mean, and then they said yes. I was like, okay, then I can put that in there. As far as limitation goes, this first most evident one is that I'm interviewing people and trying to give actual data on anxiety relief, scientifically usable data. I just went through a whole section about the brain. It's, self-evaluation, as they think, it's limited because they think that they're giving me their honest opinion, and they really think they are. If they're lying, it's not their fault. But sometimes, maybe they don't. Maybe they misspeak, or they attribute something to pot that doesn't, it's not actually that. They're one person, and it's all their interpretation. So, humans are very fallible, and it is therefore unreliable in that sense. I'm sure you've heard the music in the background, and okay, no, he stopped. He heard me whining. Okay. Also, another limitation just in self-evaluation is the lack of constructs. Constructs, for those who have not taken Psychology 230, is essentially ways to measure something qualitatively, ways to measure something that doesn't exist. Ways to, justice doesn't exist, freedom doesn't exist, but you can, measure how free somebody is, by using a construct. So in the same sense that I don't really have a good way to I'm not testing anything, I'm just interviewing people. So anything that I come up with, any of my results, if I say, oh, cannabis puts you in the moment, there's no scientific recording of how in the moment are you, unless I invent a vibe machine or something. But yeah, limitation. Okay, I know this is a bit of a cluster truck of a data slide, but I'm gonna break it down. I did try on color code. It's the prettiest color coding I've ever done, because I don't color code. But how I tried to do it is I tried to take the entire interview and condense it into their important points. They had other significant, things and observations to them. It was an interesting conversation all around with them, but what I selected to show you kind of what I feel most represent things that support my little hypothesis that the experience may be a little bit not universal, but a little bit shared between us in terms of self-improvement and all those things. Especially about anxiety relief. So let me try and explain these dimensions a little bit. Many of my participants, as you can see, 4 of 5. I don't know if I need to explain this a little bit, but yeah, no, if I marked their color, these are the same, this color is from this quote, and so on and so forth, and the color boxes are that they seem to have agreed with, or not that they agreed, but they said something that aligned with this box. So these guys obviously didn't. But as far as focus goes, a lot of, I mean, 4 out of 5 And even the fifth one kind of said something similar, but it wasn't close enough where I could count it because data collection is weird in this format. But they very consistently said that ordinarily they worry about a large list of things. Their mind is giving a lot of attention to anxieties about the future, things that could go wrong. Some of them say, their focus is too divided, and then one of them directly said that. But basically, it allowed them to be immersed in a single thing, which I fully agree with. It'll just get you zoned out doing one particular task. And a lot of them seem to apply that to anxious thinking, and say that it directly improves their mood. They all are very fond of not giving emotional attention to things that don't need emotional attention. As far as his limits anticipation, that was honestly the overarching theme. As you can see, everybody said that it stops them worrying. Oh wait, there's a song for this. Baby, don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing. Sorry. Well, he smoked a lot of weed, so there's the relation there. But it just puts you in the moment, as some of them say. I'll kind of go silent there and leave this on for a little bit if y'all wanted to read some of the quotes there and figure out who said what. But yeah, as far as limits anticipation, a lot of them said that they are warriors. They think about things that could, that aren't related to what they're doing, and it seems to allow. The anticipation seems to be a little bit negative. It's not like they're not worthwhile thoughts. It's just that they could be more important. And especially the purple guy here, he only does it twice a week, and he's kind of so that he spends time, regular worry, but then he has good little mental vacations, he calls them, where all that just goes away, and it's not here. So what I'm going to say is he worries about his children, worry about if they're healthy, if they're sleeping, if they're sleeping right, if their cars are working, just little day-to-day worries about them. That's his Monday to Friday. But Friday night, Saturday night, he is in a cloud thinking about how he's prepared them for a good life, how he's raised them to be good citizens. They've all got roofs over their heads. It changes, and that perspective shift happens to most things. He says it goes from micro to macro, he calls it, and I think that's a good amount of that structure seems to have limit anxiety. That was just ignore what I just said there. It was a little bit impromptu, but I like that. In fear of going over and I'm not going to bore you with an explanation of all of these, and nor are these steadfast, like, bona fide, these are the causes, these are how it helps. Nor am I saying that this is any of that. What I am saying is that by the current literature, it has very strong, I'm going to say very strong, unbiased, I'll say it has anxiolytic and antidepressant potential. Anxiolytic being anxiety reducing. But the current speculation seems to, or for the cause of it, seems to be neurotransmitters, like, you get more dopamine in your system. Or one of them I saw was increased social interaction. They think that it makes you more social. Makes sense. Being social makes you happier. Also makes sense, which actually does. It's a little consistent with my experience. Reduced harm avoidance is also another one, and that is interesting. harm avoidance.